other parts of the world. Speaking of which, this is really exciting. We have people from 18 countries on 6 continents signed up for this webinar right now. Pam, the next time you do this, you need to concentrate your marketing on the penguins in Antarctica so that we can get continent number 7 represented. But this is just exciting. As Pam mentioned, the internet is occasionally a little glitchy here in Vietnam, but I think this is all going to work out okay. So anyway, let's get started. Thank you all wherever you are in the world for being here. And good morning, good evening, good happy lunchtime, whatever time it is where you are. We took a poll before we started this webinar, and we asked all of you guys what your experience was as a travel writer. And 31% of you said you were a total newbie. 54% described yourselves as a work in progress. And I guess we are all always works in progress as writers, aren't we? Then the other 15% said they were either an aspiring author or a professional writer. So whatever your skill level is, thank you for being here today. And I've been teaching travel writing classes and various types of travel writing for a couple of decades now. And I'm going to be talking about 2 very different kinds of travel writing during our webinar. And the way this is going to work is I'm going to give you a presentation for about 30 minutes. And then we will take a little bit of a break, and we'll have some, or I guess not a break, we'll keep going. But we will have another half hour for those of you who can stick around for another half hour of questions and answers. And as Pam was saying, if you've got any questions that come up while I'm talking at any time, you can type them in the lower left-hand chat box in your webinar screen, and Pam will be sifting through those and then picking out a nice sampling of questions that I will answer in the second half of our presentation. Now, in this first half, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do my very best to take about 5 hours worth of online course material and distill it down to 30 of the most exciting and most useful minutes for you guys. And I'm going to be talking, as I said, about 2 different styles of travel writing. I'm going to start out with personal travel journaling and just writing travel diaries for yourself. This is something that a lot of people struggle with. A lot of people bring notebooks on their vacations with them. They try to write a travel diary. They run into a couple of different problems, and I'm going to teach you how to get over those hurdles. And then the second half of this first half hour, I'm going to be talking about writing travel articles for other people to read. And that might mean getting published and selling your stories to newspapers and magazines, or writing your own book. It might mean blogging just on an amateur level or on a professional level. It might even just mean sending emailing some stories to a few friends and family members. But writing stories for other people to read requires a very different set of techniques and a different style of writing from personal travel journaling. So I'm going to talk a little bit about both of those in our webinar today. I want to start out, though, with travel journaling. I started writing about my travels when I was 7 years old, and my family moved from the United States to England. And I've been writing about my travels ever since. And for me, if I'm not writing when I'm traveling, I feel like something is missing from my trip. There are all kinds of reasons why I think journaling is an important thing to do when we travel. For starters, I think of travel as an investment in stories and in memories. The trips that we take might be short. Our vacations might just be a couple of weeks. But the stories that we accumulate along the way, we get to keep those for a lifetime as long as we can remember them. And writing them down helps us to retain those memories and keep them vivid in our mind. So when done correctly, travel journaling will bring you deeper into your surroundings. It will make you a more aware traveler. Now, I know that a lot of people feel that journaling sort of feels like an arduous chore in the middle of their trips. Well, I'm going to teach you some techniques in a couple of minutes so that journaling, number 1, will make your trips better, and number 2, will make you more aware as you start to travel with a writer's eye. There's, of course, self-discovery and that so-called inner journey that we experience when we are in foreign places. And then finally, if you do want to get into professional travel writing, a well-written travel journal is a very important tool to have. Now, that said, I do have some techniques that I teach. If you have trips that you've taken in the past and you haven't had time to journal about them, there are ways you can journal about trips after you've taken them, which will help to bring back a lot of different memories. But all of that said, I think that journaling is a really important thing to do to help us remember our trips. Now, that said, there is a different tool that most people use to remember the trips that they go on, and that is a camera. Almost everybody takes a camera of some kind with them when they go on vacation. Why do we prioritize photography over writing? Why do so many tend to do that? Well, I think the answer is pretty simple. Taking pictures is a lot quicker unless you're a really serious professional. You can just point and click, and you've captured a memory right there, and it just takes a couple seconds. Sitting down and writing does take more time. But when we are when we are working exclusively with photographs, there's a lot that we miss. I love to take pictures when I travel, don't get me wrong, but there are so many things we can't capture in a photograph that we can capture in a well-written travel diary. First of all, all of our senses. When we are dealing with photography, we are just dealing with our sense of sight through that limited confine of our viewfinder. And when we write, we can write about what we're smelling and what we're hearing, and we can cover all of our senses. There are a lot of things that we just can't photograph very well. They might be moving objects and they're blurry, or maybe it's just bad conditions. We might be in a place where it's inappropriate to take photographs, or where we're just feeling a little bit shy about pulling out our camera. As we travel, we meet fascinating people, and sometimes they tell us incredible stories. Well, we can take pictures of those people, but we can't photograph the stories that they tell us. And so we can write down those stories that they tell us, and that is how we will remember them after the fact, far more than a photograph alone is going to capture. And then once again, this concept of the inner journey and that introspective part of travel that we all experience. Now, to combat this issue, the time issue, I have a technique that I call speed journaling, and it's really, to be honest, not that original of an idea. It's been done in many other forms. If you've ever read any books by creativity gurus like Natalie Goldberg, Julia Cameron, they have similar techniques that they use for different styles of writing, but the idea behind speed journaling is you write fast. You try to splash as much information onto your pages as quickly as you can. Do not be a perfectionist, and this is really important. Do not try to create your best writing while you are on the road. Excuse me, I've got a dry mouth here in the middle of the night. Do not try to create your best writing while you are on the road. You don't have time for it. If you want to write well-polished travel tales, that's great. But in the middle of a big, exciting trip, you just don't have time to devote the energy that you need to all of that writing. So just splash as much detail as quickly into your pages as you can. And you might think, well, but Dave, I don't want to just come home with a notebook full of messy sprawl. Well, think of it this way. When you go back and you read your travel journals years after the fact, you can have one of two reactions. Wow, my journal brings back so many great memories. It's like I'm experiencing my trip all over again. Or, I didn't write much, but these 4 sentences I did get written on my trip are pretty phenomenal. And look how beautiful my handwriting was on my dream vacation. So think of your travel journals, which you write while you're traveling, as a place where you collect as many memories as you can and splash things into your notebook quickly. Now, the other problem that a lot of people run into with their journals is they feel like they're quite pedestrian and like they are just giving these bland step-by-step accounts of their days. And I want to give you some tips to get over that. The first thing I recommend is when you sit down to write, before you begin writing, just take a minute and scan one sense at a time through all 5 of your senses in the moment you are writing about. What were you seeing? What were you hearing? What were you smelling? What were you tasting? What were you feeling in terms of physical sensations? So it might be temperature, were you shivering? Were you hyped up from too much caffeine? Whatever it is, but scan through all of these senses. The reason this is important is that in any given situation, we have 1 or 2 dominant senses that are going to take over the stories that we write, and they're going to take over our awareness of things. But beneath the surface, we have less dominant senses, which sometimes have powerful stories in them. And I'll give you a quick example. I was walking through a spice market in Istanbul one time, and if you're in a spice market in Turkey, you can think your dominant sense is probably going to be your sense of smell, maybe your sense of sight as well, with all those colorful spices and so forth. As I was walking through this market and I started thinking about all of my other senses, I started paying attention to what I was hearing, and I noticed a couple of different sounds. For starters, I could hear, my PowerPoint will cooperate, there we go. I could hear the call to prayer echoing from a mosque across the street from the spice market. And at the same time, I could also hear the latest CD by Madonna echoing from a spice seller's stall. And this to me painted a really interesting picture of life in modern Turkey. You've got a population that is sticking to old traditional Islamic values, and then you've got other people that are looking to Western pop culture and really looking towards a more Western existence. And for the most part, over the last few decades, these two separate cultures have gotten along fairly peacefully in Turkey. So it painted an interesting picture, created an interesting little story. Now, if you've taken writing courses before, you have certainly heard this cliche, show, don't tell. It's an old writer's cliche, but it is so important when you are writing in your travel diary. A lot of us have heard that term, but we lose sight of what it really means. And when you are looking for things to write about, you want to be really specific in the details that you give people. And so to give you an example of that, what a lot of people do is they'll go someplace and they will write that they'll go to Paris and they'll write, Paris was beautiful, Paris was wonderful. You could say that just about any place was beautiful or wonderful or amazing or awe-inspiring. If I said I'm going to describe a place to you now, it's a beautiful place, you have no idea where I could be talking about. So you want to get a lot more specific than that. And so for an example, let's say we're going into the Mekong Delta here in Vietnam. And yes, the Mekong Delta is beautiful, but you want to go with more specific details. So write about the shimmering green rice paddies and the farmers out in their fields, maybe waist high in these irrigation trenches, and throw water on their crops and try to keep them going. All of the little wooden boats that are chugging through the tributaries of the Mekong, and some of them might be rowboats, and you can write again about the sounds you're hearing, the crunching of oars, maybe the tropical birds serenading you off in the distance, maybe a little bit about river life and the people who live aboard their houseboats, the floating markets. This is a really cool thing in the Mekong Delta. They have markets right out in the middle of the river, and the only way you can get there, they're produce markets. The only way you can go buy anything is you have to get on a boat. As a tourist, you can hire one of these and you can go out there, and it's a lot of fun. And again, try to just describe a little bit of daily life and get as specific as you can. I love this guy. He looks so joyful, just chucking cucumbers into a plastic bag, and he's got this big toothy grin on his face and his salt and pepper hair. So go for a lot of really specific detail and avoid those empty adjectives, beautiful and wonderful and that kind of thing. And then again, the inner journey. And I think that this is something we often lose sight of as travel journalers. It's interesting when people keep a travel diary at home, they tend to be not a travel diary at home, but when they're keeping just a regular diary, they tend to be quite introspective and really focusing on what's going on in their minds and in their personal lives. But when people travel, there's a tendency to only focus on the external. And I think that's natural because we're out of our element, we're out of our environment, and we're just having this sense of wonder of everything that's going on around us. But write about that sense of wonder, write about how it feels, write about your insecurities that you feel if you're out of your environment. And you really can discover a lot about yourself when you do this. And I think that travel can always be a very introspective practice, but when we journal about these things, the discoveries that we have, they stay with us because we've taken the time to really sit down and think about them and analyze them. So those are some quick tips for travel journaling. And I suggest that people think of their travel diaries that they write on the road as the notes that they can use, that we then can use to mold once we get home and to polish into publishable travel tales. But as I was saying earlier, writing travel tales for other people to read is a very different approach, a whole different set of techniques. One of the biggest mistakes that rookie travel writers make is they will go home from a trip and they will take a journal entry and they'll just try to polish that into a publishable story. And the problem with that is that our travel diaries tend to be an account of everything we've done in our day. And they're these step-by-step things. And there's a lot of stuff we write in our journals that might have been really interesting to us, but it doesn't necessarily make compelling travel writing. My background is in journalism. My degree is in journalism, and that was what I did with my life for my first few years out of college. And when you study Journalism 101, you learn about the 5 W's: who, what, when, where, and why. And then there's the awkward cousin how, who puts his W at the end of the word. These are all great questions to ask when you're writing an article of any sort, but when you're writing a travel story, there is a much, much more important question, and if you can't answer this, your story is useless. And that question is, who cares? Why will readers care about what I'm writing? What about the story is going to be interesting to them? We have to put our egos aside sometimes because we have experiences that to us can be very meaningful as travelers. But if thousands of other travelers before us have gone and had those exact same experiences, then writing about it in a generic sense isn't going to be all that interesting to readers. It's already been done. If we can find a unique spin to put on it, then that's a different story. But then that's what we need to do, is sit down and think about that who cares question. Why will readers find my story unique and different from everything else that's being written out there? A good litmus test for all of this is you want to make sure your stories fill at least one of these three. Your story needs to either inform, inspire, or entertain. You either need to be telling people something that they don't already know and teaching them something. You need to be inspiring them to maybe think about life or see the world a different way, or maybe inspire them to go on a different journey. This is where that inner journey component actually can be very interesting, even though it's about our personal experiences. Often the things that we experience and the things we learn when we're traveling can be very interesting to other readers, and we can share our own personal development and our transitions that we go through as travelers and in these more inspirational travel tales. And some travel tales are written purely for entertainment value. The other genre that I write in a lot and that I teach is humor writing. And travel and humor it's a perfect marriage of two genres, because there are so many things that can go wonky when we are off on a big travel adventure. And so there's a lot of humor, a lot of things that happen in our trips that aren't funny at the time, but they can make for hilarious travel tales afterwards. But anyway, you want to just make sure that your stories cover at least one of these three things. They need to inform, inspire, and or entertain. If you can cover two or all three, you're doing even better. But you want to catch the most interesting, exciting, and eye-opening moments. What did you learn or discover on a trip? Experience changed you? How has it transformed you? Now, the first thing you need to do when you sit down to write a travel tale for an audience is think about your lead, think about your opening paragraph. And here's an example of a mediocre lead. I had dreamed for years of visiting Vietnam. As our plane circled to land, I gazed out the window at a cluttered city below. Well, why is this a mediocre lead? If we're writing a story about Vietnam, we're not even in Vietnam. We're still on the airplane. And unless something really crazy is about to happen on our flight, this is probably not interesting to our story. You want to jump right into the action. Don't let your backstory kill your story. A lot of beginning writers will have a tendency to start their stories out with a big warm-up, how they had always dreamed of going somewhere, and sometimes it gets really tedious where they're talking about, I was nervous about going, but then I went and bought my ticket, and my sister agreed to come with me, and they've taken up 4 or 5 paragraphs. Well, if you do that, I don't mean to sound harsh, but you've lost your readers, and particularly in the online era, if you don't hook your readers from the very first paragraph, you will not keep them through the entire story. Not only readers, but editors as well, if you are trying to sell your work. So it's really important to not get real flabby with your backstory. Sometimes that happens in our first draft, but then be looking for that and go through and you edit. There's one technique that I really like. It works very well with travel writing, and there is a Latin term, in medias res. You don't need to remember the term, but remember what it means: in the middle of things. And what it means is that you want to jump right into the action of the story. So here is an example of a better, more effective lead. And again, this is your opening paragraph, story about Vietnam. The street vendor's bicycle comes outfitted with a rack of dried squid and a smoldering charcoal grill. He plucks the squid from the rack, heats it up over the coals, and serves me my snack with a dollop of chili sauce. Now you'll notice we haven't even told the reader where we are yet. They might be going, huh, what country are we in? What continent are we on? So you want to get to that quickly as you keep going. But the very first thing we're doing is going, hey, dude, you got to check out these bikes that they have. In Vietnam, they ride around on them. They've got these big racks on them, and they've even got live burning charcoal grills on the back. And that is something unique. That's something that's going to catch people's attention. From there, you can then backtrack and explain where you are, how you got there, and why you're there, if it's relevant to your story. And then you move onward, and you tell the rest of the story and move on toward your conclusion. But try to find something really catchy to hook your reader. Start right in the middle of the action and think of one of the most exciting things, one of the most exciting parts of your story. Again, often in the editing process, your rough draft might not do that, but then as you go back and you look at it, you'll find in your 8th paragraph, this is my opening. So don't be afraid to shuffle things around and find that really solid opening. Now, as you move into your story, as you get into the body of your story, you want to really stay focused on the story at hand and keep your writing streamlined. Be very careful about not going off on a lot of distracting tangents and going into a lot of extraneous details. And again, this is another common rookie error. And again, another perhaps an ego issue at times. We feel like everything we did on a trip was so exciting and so important. And maybe a lot of it was exciting, but that doesn't necessarily mean it belongs in the story at hand. What readers want is a streamlined tale that is focused on a specific topic, or if you're doing a destination piece, a more general destination piece, then just make sure that those various snapshots, if you will, that you're showing them throughout the story are your most exciting material, and don't be afraid to throw other stuff out. If it's a great story, if it's an exciting tangent, pull it out of that story and put it into a different story instead. But be careful about these detours that we have a tendency to take in a rough draft. And another thing to be very careful of as you are developing the body of your story, you want to really avoid. There's so many travel writing cliches out there: friendly locals, quaint villages, exotic lands. It gets tedious. So if you go online, if you go onto Google and just Google travel writing cliches, you will find a long list of them out there. Don't ever use the title "A Land of Contrasts." When we're done with this webinar, go Google that phrase, "A Land of Contrasts," and watch how many different countries and how many different destinations come up with articles that have used that title. It has been so overblown. And if you think about it, everywhere is a land of contrasts. My living room is a land of contrasts. So don't ever use that, and avoid cliches in general. And then as you get to the end of your story and you're polishing or you're wrapping things up, conclude with a solid point for your reader. It might be a lesson of something you've learned. It might be an observation about the culture that you've been writing about. If it's a humor piece, it might be a punchline. But again, remember going back to that idea that your story needs to inform, inspire, and or entertain. And think of it this way. Readers are selfish people. They read because they want to get something out of what they are reading. And you, as a writer, have an unwritten contract with your readers to fulfill one of these goals: to inform or inspire or entertain. So those are some of my very basic tips on travel writing. And in just a minute, I'm going to take questions, and I'll answer as many questions as I can. I know we said this would be a half-hour webinar. For those of you who can stick around for another half hour, I'll answer as many questions as we can get to. And I know that Pam is back in Seattle and getting some questions ready. If I brought up anything and you haven't sent in your question yet, once again, in the lower left-hand corner of your screen, feel free to type that in. I can't see your questions right now. Pam can, and she is going to tell me give me some of those top questions in just a second. While she's getting ready, I just want to mention that I do have, I've got a website, globejotting.com. I've got lots of articles on my website with more writing tips. You'll also find lots of samples of my travel humor writing. And I also teach online writing courses. And this was by accident. We're actually doing this webinar. It happens to be a big Black Friday sale for the website that is hosting my courses, and I've got some special coupons, especially for participants in this webinar. They will only be valid this week, but they are. I'm actually undercutting the sale price by a little bit of what the website Udemy.com is the company that hosts my courses. And so if you go to globejotting.com/wild, you will find some special discount coupons this week only. And if you would like my either my 75-minute course in travel journaling, it's normally $30. You can get it this week for $10. My 3.5-hour comprehensive course in travel writing and publishing, normally $65, and it is also $10 this week only if you use those coupons. I also offer one-on-one writer coaching, which you can find out about if you go to my website. One other thing I want to mention very quickly, I'm so excited about this. If you have been listening to this and going, well, this is great, Dave, but I really wish I could be there in Vietnam learning about travel writing. Hey, you know what? You can, because I am partnering with Wildland Adventures. We are putting together a very special travel writing tour in Vietnam. It's going to be 12 days long. We're going to be traveling through big cities, Ho Chi Minh City, where I live, and the capital, Hanoi. And we will also spend a few days in the Mekong Delta, where you saw some photographs of earlier, and also 2 nights on our own private cruise boat in Halong Bay. And the way it's going to work, it's going to be part tour, part travel writing workshop. I will be teaching writing classes on most days of the trip. You'll have some free time to go out and find stories, and it will be the most hands-on travel writing course I think you will ever get your hands on. I guess that was redundant. But if you would like to know more about that, just go to wildland.com or get in touch either with me or with Pam when this is all said and done. I'm really excited about having a trip with a whole bunch of, oh no, am I frozen? Yikes, I'm getting a message that I am frozen and I need to reboot. Is that right, guys?
Dave, you're good.
We hear you, Dave.
Oh, you can hear me? Am I back? Was that an old message that just came through?
I don't know,
I got a message. Okay, good. Did you hear everything I said, or did I cut out for a while?
I think we got you. We might have skipped a few words, but for the most part, we got your intent. Okay. All right, so I'm gonna take it over.
Go ahead, Pam, go.
All right. Thank you so much, Dave, for the engaging presentation. We are certainly inspired to up our travel writing game. And we know that this information is a lot, and it's only the tip of the iceberg. And that during the March trip to Vietnam, Dave will be going into much more detail and giving you hands-on coaching in the daily writing workshops, whether your intention is to polish your journals or get published. For those of you that can hang around for a few more minutes, Dave will be answering questions that participants have been submitting during the presentation. And so I'm going to go there right now. For those of you that can't stick around, I want to say thank you for joining us. And we look forward to seeing you on a future webinar. So let's start with this question. Let's see. Are there pitfalls? Dave, this is from Richard. Are there pitfalls in using first-person writing in travel writing?
I love that question. What a great way to kick things off. And thanks for your question, Richard. No, I don't think there are pitfalls, but I think it depends on the type of writing you're doing. And there are times when you really want to put yourself in the story, and there are times when you don't. When I think the times when you do, that would be if you are having an experience which is really life-changing for you, or just it's an unusual experience that you are having. Again, travel humor, you want to put yourself in the story because you don't want to target a foreign culture with your humor. Targeting yourself is a lot more effective. Now, the flip side to that, though, is that, yeah, there are times when it is better to focus on the destination or the other people in the story and keep yourself entirely out of the story. That's a more of a journalistic approach to travel writing as opposed to an anecdotal kind of travel tale writing. And so I guess my answer to that would be there is not a right or a wrong way. It's a matter of style. But just ask yourself, do I matter in this story? Am I an interesting character in this story? Are my experiences interesting in this story? If you can't answer very confidently yes to that, then I say keep yourself out of the story as much as possible.
All right, so question number 2 comes to us from Michelle. How do you get all that detail into a very short piece if you have a 300-word limit?
Yeah, one of the biggest challenges that all writers face, I think, is keeping their writing tight and writing to a short word count. A 300-word limit, that is really short for a travel article. Most of the stories that I write tend to be, I'd say 800 is a good word count to shoot for. However, it depends on the type of story you're writing, and sometimes a magazine editor might say, I want 300 words on this. What you need to do, first of all, is just make sure your writing is as crisp and tight as possible. Use as few words for each phrase as you can. But then at that point, you just need to be selective about the details. And sometimes you have to throw out details to fit an editor's requirements because it's just, that's the space that's been allotted to you. I know for online, there's a school of thought that you start to lose readers after 600 words. I go a little bit longer than that, and I figure, you know, if people are interested in the story, they'll stick with me a bit longer. But yeah, you really, it can be painful at first, but it's a matter of practice. The more practice you get at tightening your work, the more comfortable you will get with throwing some details out. And you just, sometimes you can't tell the whole story when you're limited to something that short, like 300 words. Great question.
Great, thanks, Dave. Let's see, this next question is from Cheryl. Cheryl says, what do you think about using voice recordings to document, then later put your words into writing?
I get asked this a lot, and I personally don't like doing that, and there are a couple of reasons why I don't like doing that. For one thing, you know, it's funny, my background is in radio, but whenever I sit down and try to dictate my own travel diaries, I lose my train of thought. I'm not thinking fast enough. I start to ramble. But my bigger reason for not liking that is that when I write a travel diary, and I like to still handwrite my travel journals. If I'm writing a polished piece that I'm going to try to publish, I will type a laptop, but I still journal by hand in my personal diaries. When you go back to read your journals, it's much easier if you've got a book, or for that matter, if you prefer typing it on a computer. It's easier to skim through and read it. If you've got an audio recorder, my experience has been I never go back and listen to those audio recordings. Now that said, I am also a big believer in do whatever works for you. And if recording, I'd say give it a try if you're interested in doing it. If recording your journals is something that you find to be effective, and if that's the way that you actually get your journaling done, then by all means do it. Something else that can be fun, and this is something I've done from time to time, if you're traveling with a partner, the two of you can sit down and have kind of a discussion or an interview type of a thing, where if one of you loses your train of thought, or you just kind of, you know, you say a few things, but there's this give and take and this back and forth. That to me is fun to do. But my main reason for not liking to record my journals is that I just never go listen to them later. And if I'm writing under deadline and I need to do something quickly, I don't want to have to listen to, you know, 3 hours of journal recordings. Thanks for the question.
All right, let's go to the next question here. And this is from Kurt Katai, the president of Wildland Adventures, who has been listening in. And Kurt says, aside from journal entries at the end of the day, what technique do you recommend for note-taking in the moment through the course of the day to gather the specific details as it's happening? And what details are most relevant? For example, names of people, places, things.
Yeah, oh wow, Kurt, I'm so glad you asked me that, because that was a really important point that I totally forgot to mention. I always carry a little pocket notebook with me in addition to my main travel journal, just a little pocket-sized notebook that I can pull out at any time, and I use it to scribble notes. I might have some quick thoughts about what's going on around me. Sometimes I'll write a whole blog post out by hand if I'm just sitting at a cafe and I haven't remembered to bring my bigger journal with me. And so I think that's really important. Some people like to use their smartphone. I still use a pocket notebook instead of a smartphone for that kind of thing, because there are times where I don't want to take out my phone because maybe it's a busy street and I don't want someone to snatch it from me. I can scribble by hand faster than I can tap text into my phone. But for journalers, that pocket notebook, in addition to your main diary, will help you get down a few of the key things you want to remember in the moment, so that you don't forget to journal about them later. Now, for professional travel writers, it's even more important. And I could hear that was partly where Kurt was coming from with his question, because you know, names, first of all, if you're going to be quoting people, it's very important that you get their names spelled correctly, and also that you get their words written down accurately. You need to quote them. You really need to get their words correct if you are quoting people in articles. Now, there are different schools of thought. This is a more complicated issue than I have time to go into right now, but as a general rule, err on the side of making sure you get someone's words correct and take notes as you do that. Also, just writing down, you know, spellings of the places you go to, and that kind of thing. Those details will come in very handy to you later, particularly if you are going for professional publication. Thanks for that question, Kurt.
All right, next question is from Carrie. How do you decide what your larger audience will think is interesting as opposed to what you find interesting?
That is a tricky thing when you are starting out, and this is something that comes with experience and with practice and with, you know, taking some travel writing classes and things like that, or just the more you write and the more you can get critiqued. Joining a critique group can be a great thing as well, and getting feedback from other people on, do they find this interesting? That will help. I'm also a huge fan of amateur travel blogs as an intermediate step to getting published in more serious publications, because you get that reader feedback. People can leave comments and that sort of thing. But I think that, you know, just ask yourself, first of all, is what I'm writing about something unusual? Is it something that, has this been written before? It's very easy these days to go online and do some research and Google something and see if other people have written similar articles. Try to find your unique spin on it. I think that, you know, some people say, oh, nothing interesting happens to me when I travel. I don't agree with that. I think as travel writers, we start to learn how to make things extra interesting. We start doing things that we know will draw us into bigger stories, but any traveler has interesting things happen. How do you create a version of that that is interesting to readers? This is where I think you might want to, in the beginning, try taking yourself out of the story as much as possible. Write about the other people around you, the things you are seeing. But I think also when you're starting out, just try to get feedback from other writers or even from non-writers, friends and family, but be sure that it is people who are going to give you honest feedback. It's nice to have people go, oh, that was so good, but that's useless feedback to us. What you really want to know is, what didn't you like? What was boring? What was tedious? Ask people to be harsh with you. You'll develop a thick skin over time, and you will become a much stronger writer if you can do that.
Great. Let's see, I have a question here from Carissa. For someone who hasn't had my writing published before, what are some ideas for getting started in publishing my travel writing?
Well, again, I think one of the best things you can do just to get some practice is start a travel blog, because anybody can do it. And one of the beautiful things about blogging is some people do it professionally, but there are tons of amateur people out there who are blogging. Writing is, you know, it's not a magical gift that some lucky people are born with. It's a skill, and anybody can learn how to be a great writer. The way you do it is by studying the craft, whether it's taking courses or reading books or going to writers groups, finding writers partners, find a critique partner or a writing coach. Get as much feedback as you can. When you are breaking into freelancing, you know, those first couple of publications are the ones. Once you get rolling, you develop relationships with editors, and it's much easier to for them to get them to read your pitches and actually look at your emails that you send them. But I think when you're starting out, start small. I mean, you can always shoot high. I'm a fan of shooting high, but also look for smaller publications. Another mistake that a lot of beginners make is they only try to sell their travel stories to travel publications. And you can, so look outside the genre of travel writing. If you have a story about, I don't know, truffle hunting in France. I keep going to France today for some reason. Or let's go back to the squid bike. We'll do that. You got a story about your squid bike. That might be an interesting story for a food magazine. That might be an interesting story for a cycling magazine. So look beyond the scope of travel publications. And another thing is, great resource is Writers Market, and they've got a website, writersmarket.com, and it's a subscription site, but you pay like $5 or $6 a month, and it's a listing of thousands of publications that buy freelance articles and that are looking for freelance articles, and you'll see what they pay, you'll see what their circulation is. So you will find a lot of smaller, more obscure publications that are good for starting out. They're easier to get into and get those first few clips. And what happens is over time, you develop a little bit more street cred and you start working your way into the bigger, more high-profile publications.
Great. I've got another question here from David. David asks, do you interact with the local people? And how is that done if you don't speak any common language?
So that's actually sort of two different questions. And the first question I'm hearing, and I may need you to repeat the entire thing again for me, second time, Pam, but the first component of that is, when do you simply interact and have a natural interaction, and when do you switch over to interviewing? Because a lot of people, when you start interviewing them, the exchange becomes a little bit less authentic. And so at what point do you kind of make that transition? Now, if you are looking to write a serious travel piece, or maybe even more of a journalistic kind of an article, then at some point you need to go into interviewing mode. But what I will try to just start a casual conversation with somebody, and if it seems like it's getting into something that I'm going to want to use in an article, then I might say after a few minutes, hey, I'm a travel writer, and this is really interesting to me. Would you mind if I just take a few notes while you're talking? And keep it really casual. Don't go, oh, I'm a travel writer and I need to quote you accurately. There's a lot of skill in how you approach people. Keep it really casual, and start out with just a natural conversation. But at some point, yeah, you do need to move into interviewing. And I knew I was going to do this, Pam. I had a second part of that question. Could you repeat that question for me? Because I've forgotten the second thing I was going to say there.
Do you interact with local people? And how is that done if you don't speak a common language?
Yeah. If you don't speak a common language, it depends on the situation. I am writing a book right now about a specific street in Saigon, or Ho Chi Minh City, and we call them both. Ho Chi Minh is the official name, but I'm writing a book about a street. It's called Globejotting Street. If you've ever been to Saigon, you may know it. It's in the heart of the backpacker district, the budget travel area. It's a crazy street. But my book is not about all the crazy tourists who go there and have these wild parties. It's about the people who live there, and about how tourism is affecting their lives, and it's sort of the biography of the neighborhood. I've had to interview a lot of street vendors, and I've talked to everybody from a lady who's been selling noodles on the street for 25 years to a convicted heroin dealer who is now back at work. And so my Vietnamese, I've lived in Vietnam for 1 year. I love learning languages, but this is a tough one to learn, and my Vietnamese is not good enough to be interviewing people yet. I've got a friend who comes with me and translates for me, and if you're doing that kind of serious reporting, then at some point you may need to hire a translator. But also, if you can just find someone who speaks English, you may need to hire them for the day, and depending on where you are, that might cost you a lot of money, or it might be very cheap. But find someone who speaks good English, ask them if they will come out and translate for you. Now, there are times when you can write travel tales about people where you haven't been able to talk to each other, and that can become the story in and of itself. How did you communicate when there was a huge language barrier and you couldn't actually communicate through spoken language? So, sometimes you have to sort of sort that out. Another thing you can do, if you think you got what they were trying to tell you, but maybe let's say you are communicating in English, but their English is basic, and you're not sure that they're telling you what you think they're telling you, then you can write that into your story, you know, that this person said this to me, and I think that she might have meant this, but maybe she meant this. That too can become a part of the story. I think what's important is transparency with your readers. If there's translation going on, make sure they know that. If there is a language barrier and you're not sure you're getting everything right, then make sure they know that. And if you want to go out and ask people a lot of questions and there is a thick language barrier, then at some point you do need to, one way or another, find someone to translate for you.
Great. Dave, here's a question from Juliana. Juliana says, do editors prefer a journalistic approach over a personal reflection approach for publishing?
That depends on not just the editor, it actually depends on the publication. And this is very important. Before you pitch a story to any publication, you need to do your homework, you need to do your research. The great thing in this day and age is we've got the internet, and a lot of magazines and newspapers put their content online, at least some samples of it. So you can go and you can see what sort of a style they have. The last thing you want to do is pitch a style of article, is pitch the wrong style of article to a particular editor, to a particular publication. If you do that too many times, they're just going to stop reading your pitches. So if you've got an approach you are wanting to take, you know, different stories call for a different tone. And so you might have some stories where you want to take a very casual, chatty first-person approach. You might have other stories where you want to take a more hard news journalistic style of writing. Write the article in whatever style you want to, and then find the publications where it fits. There is room for both in the giant, you know, universe of publishing. But you need to make sure that you're finding a good pitch, or a good place to pitch your story before you pitch it. You want to find a good fit for that story.
Great, great. All right, and I think this might be our last question here, so we're going to wrap it up pretty quick. Deborah asks, she says, let's say we've done the journaling and the writing. How do you know when you're finished? That is, how do you know when the piece is ready for a publishing outlet?
I love ending on that question. That is a constant struggle that many of us face. I've been a professional writer for 25 years, and I still wrestle with that sometimes. And we can actually edit our stories to death sometimes, and we water them down because we spend too much time editing them. You need to go through a story a few times and get it as good as you can. But there does come a point at which you need to put it to rest and walk away from it, or maybe not walk away from it, but get it out there, pitch it. You know, you can spend, part of getting published really is a numbers game. And the more stories you pitch, the greater chance you have of getting published. So you want to get your stories as good as you can, but don't go for making them perfect, because you can always edit your stories. I've written 2 books. And if I were to go with my anecdotal travel humor book, you know, I could open that book up today and still be editing those stories. But I published this book 8 years ago, and I wouldn't have done any of the other writing I've done over the last 8 years. So at some point you need to say, it's good enough, I'm going to get it off my desk. One of the rules of thumb that I use is when I get to a point where I used to like the story and I'm sick of it, and I've come to hate it because I've read it so many times that I can't stand it anymore, that means I've spent enough time on it and it's ready to start sending it out and getting it out into the world one way or another. Great question, because that really is something that a lot of writers struggle with, and not just travel writers.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Dave, for all this very useful information. We are going to just start wrapping things up here, and we did get some questions that we weren't able to answer. And so we will be able to respond personally to you. And so Dave and I will go through those. If you have any questions about Dave's writing courses or the trip to Vietnam, please let us know. We will be following up in the next 24 hours with a follow-up email with some links to some resources to the classes that Dave mentioned that you can get a discount on, and also to do some special inside tips that we will be sharing with you as well. So also prizes, I forgot to mention the prizes. We do have some prizes, and that will be in the follow-up email. The winners of the prizes will be in the follow-up email as well. So be sure to keep your eyes out for that, and we will announce those names there. So again, thank you so much. And with that, we are going to conclude.